It's monsoon season in India. After beginning in May and building up over June, rains covered the entire country over the weekend. The monsoon is a lifeline for farmers who depend on these rains to grow their crops like rice. But very dry areas in the north and west will be looking to the monsoon for relief as well. An intense heatwave this year has brought drought to many parts of Rajasthan state. Here, trains bringing 2 million litres of water have become the only reliable source of it.
These 40 wagons, all of them filled with water, are a lifeline for the state of Rajasthan. This desert region often sees temperatures rise to about 45 degrees Celsius. But this year, the heat wave arrived earlier. 3 months of drought has left thousands of inhabitants without water.
Look, I opened the tap and there's no water. At the moment, we only get water once every 10 days. Without water, we can't do anything. All I ask is for water to drink.
Twice a day, local authorities fill up the train with water from a lake nearby and transport it over 60 kilometers. As soon as the train arrives, residents flock to get their buckets filled, even though the water is not yet drinkable. It should be filtered by a treatment plant before being redistributed.
Yes, this water is not filtered, but what can we do about it? Plastic bottles are too expensive. We can't afford to buy them. This problem has never been so serious. Look at what we're facing today.
Prolonged drought has worsened the situation here, one of the driest regions in India. Artificial lakes have been empty since last August, giving farmers a hard time.
You see these little walls? The water used to rise up to here. Everything was submerged. It has always been hot here, but such a lack of water I have never seen before. This lake was full. All the families had water. This year, we have a real problem.
For Pawar and other residents, the only solution to their problems, for now at least, is the train.
We can speak now to Dr. Aditi Mukherjee, an expert on water issues who co-wrote the chapter on water in this year's report from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. She joins us from Kolkata in India. Welcome to DW News Asia. We've just been seeing the effects of drought in India. People are hoping for relief with the monsoon rains which are happening now. How is that panning out?
The monsoons, while they were supposed to be more or less normal, they are not being quite normal. There has been delays in various parts, but it's still the very beginning of the monsoon. So there are still expectations and predictions that the monsoon overall will be normal for the continent as a whole. But even with normal monsoons, what happens is some regions get more rain and some regions get less. So overall, it's been 1 month into the monsoon, and overall there have been deficiencies, with the prediction that those will be caught up in the remaining 2 months or so.
Okay, so some areas are
overall a difficult. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
So overall, a difficult start to a monsoon. Let me put it that way.
Okay, so a difficult start to the.
Expecting.
Difficult start to the monsoons, as you say. Some areas are expected to get normal rains, others less. India has also been experiencing torrential flooding. Is this a case of sometimes either too little water or too much?
Yes, just now as you speak, there has been absolutely torrential rainfall and massive floods happening in the northeast of India, while there are, you're speaking of droughts in Rajasthan. So overall, yes, this happens. This has happened in the past, but obviously, as we know, that climate change is making these patterns of too much rain and too little rain much more regular. So what now we are having is, even though a monsoon rainfall can be normal overall, by normal I mean total quantity of rain can be similar, but the entire rainfall pattern can become very different. So you may have a huge rainfall even for a single day, and then a long stretches of dry period. And that has been one of the ways in which climate change has been affecting monsoonal rainfall, by changing the actual rainfall event.
Okay, so very different patterns of rainfall as a result of climate change. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the solutions. Earlier this year, you wrote in the journal Nature that limiting global warming, and I'm going to quote you here, requires carbon emissions to plummet immediately, but too many carbon removal of efforts overlook demands on water. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Yes, so while we know that this is the decade where we have to take huge amount of mitigation action, reduce carbon dioxide emissions from pretty much all our sectors, we also know that if we don't plan those very well, there could be negative impacts on water and land and food. By this, I mean, I can give you an easy example of forestation. When you are putting in new forest in regions that are already water scarce, what it can do is those forests can actually young forests can use up too much water in that space and create local water scarcity. The same applies for measures such as growing biofuel crops, as a substitute of fossil fuel. And when you are devoting land to growing crops that are meant to be fuel instead of food, that can actually trigger things like, increased cost of food and, decreased access of food, particularly to the poor. So that's what we meant by we need to look at the impacts of mitigation very carefully. Having said that, mitigation will remain central. We have to mitigate, we have to reduce CO2 emissions, but we have to choose judiciously, making sure that our mitigation does not then, lead to other negative consequences in water, land, or food. That was what I had meant in that article you quoted.
Okay, and if I understand you correctly, you're basically saying that water needs to be put at the heart of the solutions going forward. Is water being ignored, and if so, why?
That's a good question. I think in the climate community, because of the way these treaties are framed, be it the Paris or be the Glasgow, the goal is carbon mitigation. So majority of the climate world, actually, all these negotiations take around carbon per se. What I think water is, I would not say water is completely ignored, but it's kind of invisible. It's not been as visible as, say, the need to reduce CO2. And water is inherent in many things, as the example I was giving, that reducing CO2 also has water implications. So I think it's up to the water community and the climate community to come together and tease out these water implications, both for mitigation, but also the way people are adapting to changing climate. So, yes, maybe there isn't. We don't talk water enough in our climate negotiations.
And you're talking about various stakeholders coming together. What should be done in terms of better management and policy making?
I think for me, one of the important things would be to have space on the table, on the climate negotiation table, both for the water community at large, because water community and the climate community historically have not always worked closely together. I think that needs to change for successful climate change mitigation or adaptation. And also overall, what needs to happen is that those who will be most affected by climate change, and those communities are often the ones who may not have necessarily emitted large amounts of carbon dioxide historically, they also need a space and a voice in the table. I refer to indigenous communities, I refer to low-income countries. So, I mean, that's already there through UNFCCC processes, but it's just their voices needs to come out louder and have to be taken more cognizance of in future discussions and actions. So two things, water needs to have a place, and the voices of those who have actually been deeply affected by climate change have to have a voice that matters.
It's been really great to get your insights today. That was water expert Dr. Aditi Mukherjee. We really thank you for your time. As we've been hearing, India's water shortages are being worsened by climate change, but a dedicated group of women being called India's Water Friends are working to change that. After years of backbreaking work, they're starting to see some really promising results.
Taking away the rubble one stone at a time. These women are building a dam to bring a scarce resource back to their village, water. They hope to finish the dam in time to catch some of the monsoon rains. The volunteers are part of an initiative called Jal Saheli, which translates as water friends.
There's been a water problem for about a decade. We stand in line and wait for hours to get water from the pump. There have been fights over water.
Fetching water has always been the responsibility of women in rural India. But in the drought-hit region of Bundelkhand, their job has been getting harder and harder. Many wells in the area have completely run dry. Unable to irrigate their fields, farmers have had to give up their land and find work in the city. Decades ago, water was a community-managed resource. Now it's administered by India's government. Jal Saheli is helping its volunteers rediscover old water storage techniques.
Every month we hold a meeting. We discuss the drought-prone areas of the region and find where we should stop the water so that monsoon water is not wasted.
And their efforts are paying off. The work of the volunteers has transformed life in many villages. And through an information campaign, they're spreading the word to other communities.
113 villages are water sufficient with efforts from Jal Saheli. Now people get water throughout the year. They get water for drinking, irrigation, and for their animals. Villages are prospering now that there's access to water again. That's the result of our work.
And their work is far from done. With roughly 600 million Indians facing acute water shortages daily, the Water Friends will carry on their efforts to make sure that water remains a resource available for all.